is into our web page. Of course, before we can include an image, we'll need to get one that we want to include in our page. Now you can use any image you've got on your computer, but I'm going to show you how to do it with an image that we find online. So I'm just going to go to Wikipedia and search for my favorite cartoon character, Homer Simpson. And there he is. So I'm going to get this image and put it into our web page. So I'm going to do that by control clicking or right clicking on the image and then save image as. And that will save the image onto my computer. I'm going to save it in the same folder as my webpage.html file. And I'm just going to change it to Homer to keep it simple, much easier to access then. There we go. So that's saved the homer.png image. PNG is a file type for an image. If you have a different image, you might have JPEG or GIF instead. It doesn't matter, they all work the same way, but it is important that you know what the whole file name for your image is. All right, now we can go back to our web page and let's see how we add an image. It's actually pretty straightforward. So we'll get rid of our code for the ordered list. And then to add an image, we use the imege tag. And this is a self-closing tag. So again, we just close it there. There's not going to be a closing of the image tag, but we do need to specify an attribute for this tag, and that is the src or source. So this tells us, or tells the browser, where the image is and what it's called. So we're going to call it homer.png. You can see that the text editor I'm using here actually predicts that for us because it's looking for file names in the same directory as the web page, which is really handy. But if yours doesn't, don't worry, just type out the file name and then save that and then refresh, and there we go. So now we've got an image right there in our web page. And we can, of course, add whatever other content we want to this. So we might want to put a little label underneath just to say that this is Homer Simpson, and that will then align itself underneath the image. So there's lots of ways that you can customize images. I'm just going to show you a few here. So first off, what we might want to do is change the size of the image. And we might do that using width equals, and let's say we want to set the width to 100 pixels. Let's have a look and see what effect that has. So you can see 100 pixels is quite a bit smaller than it is by default, but it nicely scales the image as well. If you didn't want the image to be scaled, you might want for it to be a square image for some reason. So you could then specify the height as being 100 as well, and then that would squish the image up. You can also change the alignment of the image. So if you want it to align left, for example, you can just add align equals left, and then it will align to the left of any text that comes after it. Similarly, you can align it to the right, and then the image will be aligned to the right of the page. The last thing I'd like to show you is that you can actually link to an image directly on the internet. So let's go back to Wikipedia, and let's say instead of Homer we wanted a picture of Marge Simpson. And this time, instead of saving the image as, we're going to copy the image address, which copies the URL or web address for the image, which I've just pasted in there. So it starts HTTPS and then has a load of extra stuff and ends up with margesimpson.png. So I can actually paste that directly into my source or src attribute for the image tag, and then that will load it directly into the page. There we go. So that saves us having to download it and allows us to link to it directly on the Wikimedia servers. A word of warning though, obviously if you don't have control over the image, they might change the location of it or block you from downloading it for some reason. It wouldn't be a good idea to do this on a production site. And also, this is known as hot linking when you link to an image on someone else's site, and quite often they don't like that, especially if your site is very busy and they start to get lots of server traffic because you're taking the image from their site. So generally, any images on your site, I'd recommend downloading and putting on your servers and accessing from there rather than doing this hot linking. Here we go. So I'll just change that to Marge. And I think I preferred the alignment being on the left. So we'll leave that as it is there. Nice. So we're now going to move on from images and see how we can start to build in a little bit of interaction with our web pages by using forms. All right, so we're now going to say goodbye to Marge and get rid of our image. And we're going to look at how we can add forms to our web pages. Forms allow your pages to be interactive and the users to enter data, tick boxes, and click buttons. So they're really powerful and really easy to use. Let's see how we get started. As you might guess, there's a tag called form. And that's what we're going to use to create our forms. And then anything inside a form will be then part of that form. So a very basic element to have in your form is an input element. Now this is one of those self-closing tags again, so we don't need a closing tag, but let's just have a look what input on its own looks like. It's very simple, it's just a box. So it's a box and then you can start typing some text in there if you want to. So you might have something like username and then a colon and then your input, and it looks like that. Now the input tag here has several attributes that we can use, and the first one we'll look at is type. So we can have different types of input, and you can see quite a few of them being predicted for me there. So the first one I'll just show you is not test, but text. So this is exactly what we've got here. So this is the default type, but really if you're going to use an input, you should use a type regardless of whether you're using the basic type or not, just so that it's clear in your code that you want this to be a text input. But let's have a look then at some of the other types of input that we can use. In fact, we'll put that in a paragraph so that they'll all be on different lines. So let's create another input with a type of, and we'll first look at checkbox. Let's see then what that looks like. It's what you might guess, a simple tick box. So quite often you might see that next to, for example, if you're in a login form, there's often an option to stay logged in. And then you can decide with your checkbox whether or not you want to stay logged in. Another type of input is the radio input, which is not necessarily so obvious as to what it is. But let's take a look. You will definitely have seen them while going around the web. So it's very similar to a checkbox, but the difference is with each set of radio buttons, you can only select one of them. So for example, you might want to have one that says under 18, and then another that says over 18. Like that. Of course, you could have a whole string of different sets of ages, and they would only be able to check one of those. Now, if you try that, however, at the moment we can select both. And that's because we haven't linked these up in any way. Our code doesn't know that these are part of the same set of radio buttons. And we can link them up by giving them a name. So we might say age. So now that they both have the same name, if we now see how it works, if we click one and then select the other, you can see we can only select one of them. And again, if we had a whole string of these, we would only be able to select one of them if they all had the name age. And in fact, later on when we do more work with forms, we'll see that pretty much every form element should have a name so that you can refer to it and do something with it when the user submits the form. But to do that, you need a little bit more coding knowledge than we have at the moment, so we'll get there when we come to it. The next element we'll look at is the drop down. And this actually works differently. It's not an input, it's a select. So let's see how this works. You can see we've got a select tag there, and then inside the tag we have our options. So let's say, for example, that we want to get the favorite food of our user. And yes, I am spelling that with a U. And let's just get our tabs looking nice. This is our first long bit of code, so it starts becoming more important that we set up our tabs nicely. You can see that that's nice and clear now that everything here is inside these paragraph tags, and then these option tags are inside the select tags as well. So let's pop a few foods in there. Pizza. We'll have ice cream. And sandwiches. That should do. So let's see what that looks like. So you can see we've got a nice drop down there, and the user can select whichever one they want. Fantastic. The last one I'm going to show you is the submit button. So most forms are going to need this for the user to tell you that they've finished. So that's just another input type. And all we need to do is have a type of submit. Just like that. And then let's have a look. And then we've got a nice submit button at the bottom there. So this is a really nice basic form that uses several different elements. We've got a text input, we've got a checkbox, we've got a pair of radio buttons, we've got a select or drop down, and then we've got a submit button at the bottom. There are, of course, some other form elements, but these are the basic ones that you'll be using over and over again. Before we move on, I'm just going to show you a little bit how to customize some of these. So, for example, we might not want the submit button to have the word submit on it. We might want it to have a different value or text. And we do that using value. So the value attribute. So we might want to have click me. Something like that. And that then changes the text on the button. The value attribute can actually be used in most of these as well. So, for example, we might want to set a default username for some reason. If we wanted to do that, we just put it in as a value attribute on the username input like that, and then it would appear there and the user can get rid of it if they want to. Similarly, we could add a value attribute to the radio buttons so that code will know which one they've checked. So we might have something like value equals under 18 and value equals over 18. And then later on, when we wrote some code to process that, we'd know which one had been selected by the user. Now, setting the value of username to your username isn't particularly useful because most people are then going to have to click there, select it, delete it, and then enter their username. So that's not a great way of guiding your users to do something. But if you do want to give the users a hint as to what to type in the box, you can use the placeholder attribute. Let's just have a look and see what that does. So it still puts your username in there, but you can see it's a bit faded. And then when you click in the box, and you can just start typing Rob, and that disappears straight away. So if you want to give the user a bit of guidance as to what to put in the box, then the placeholder attribute is a great way to do that. All right, two more things. First off, we might want to have this checkbox selected by default. And we can do that really easily by putting the word checked into the checkbox input as an attribute. It doesn't actually have a value, it just says checked, and then if we have a look, you can see it's checked by default. And finally, we can change which one of the three options appears as the default. So you can see pizza appears because it's at the top there, but if I want ice cream to appear as the default when the user loads the page, I just put an option of selected in there. And let's now have a look. You can see ice cream appears as the default one. And that's it. So for now, obviously your form doesn't do anything. When you click the form, you can see the page is reloaded, but we haven't written any code to actually process the form in any way. And we'll do that later on in the course. but you've learned about several different HTML elements and put them all together to make your first form. Congratulations! We're going to move on now to look at tables in HTML. Okay, now we're forms experts. We're going to get rid of our form here and start looking at tables in HTML. Tables are really useful ways of setting out data or any kind of information to the user in a sort of Excel spreadsheet-like manner. Let's take a look and see how we do it. As you might be able to guess, we use the table tag to start off our table. And then within the table, we have a table row. So tr. And then within the table row, we have individual table cells. And for those we use TD, which is short for table data. So if, for example, I wanted to put my family's favorite colors here, I might have Rob and then another item of data or cell and then green. And that would then fill the first table row. Let's just have a quick look and see. At the moment, that just looks like Rob and green. Nothing particularly special there. But then we can add another table row in the same way. And then we could have Kirsten and her favorite color, orange. Very cheerful. So now you can see it spreads out everything nicely, so everything's well aligned within the table. So now I'm just going to copy and paste these so you don't have to watch me typing them again, but we'll have Tommy. His favorite color is somewhat in transition, but at the moment it's still pink. And then Ralphie, who doesn't really know what his favorite color is, but he's been assigned blue. So there we go, that's what our table looks like. It's not much to look at, but in the next section we'll see how we can change the style with CSS and get some really pretty, well spaced out tables. I'll just show you a couple of other things that we can do with tables. The first is we can have a table head section. And then in our table head we might have a table row again. And then here, instead of having a standard bit of table data, we have a table heading section. So we might have name for the first column, for example, and then favorite color, 2 U's in there, fantastic. And then let's check that out. And you can see that we've got a slightly different styling on the table head cells there. So they're bold and they're centered as well. And we could obviously change that styling if we wanted to. If we didn't like that favorite color goes on for a bit too long, we could add a line break in there. And then it would again align everything nicely horizontally and vertically for us. Finally then, if we're going to have a table head, we should really separate the second part into a table body. Now this doesn't actually change anything in terms of the look, but it makes our code nice and clear as to which bit of the table is which. Now you can see I was individually indenting all of those. With most text editors, you can actually indent a whole chunk of code just by selecting it all and then pressing tab. And that then indents everything really nicely. Excellent. So you're now pretty familiar with HTML tables. In the next video, we'll look at one of the original innovations that led to the web, really the thing that holds it all together, and that is links.